All right, today we are doing Chapter 4, Lesson 1, starting a new chapter. Today we will focus on writing and simplifying expressions involving exponents. A lot, if not all, of what we do today might be just a review for many of you. And that's fine. It should be a pretty easy lesson. On the warm-ups, what operation are we doing on all 4 warm-up problems? Multiplication. Okay, so either a dot or parentheses tells us that we are doing multiplication. 3 times 3. -1 times -1. A negative times a negative is a? 1 times 1 is? 2 times 2 times 2.
8.
Good. 4 times 4 times 4?
32. 64. 32.
All right, let's talk about it. What is 4 times 4?
16.
And 16 times 4 is 64. Our notes for today are about powers. So the number 25 can be written as 5 times 5 and is called a power of 5. The first power of 5 usually is just written as a 5, but we could also write it with its exponent. It would have an exponent of 1. Normally, if we're just going to write the number 5, we don't put that there, but it does exist. And we could either call it 5 or 5 to the first power. So that is how we would read it. Usually we would just read it as 5, but you could read it as 5 to the first power. The second power of 5 is written with a large 5 and a little 2 up towards the top of it. Does anyone know how we would read that page? We could read it as 5 to the second. Sam? 5 squared is the other way we could read it. So either of them is acceptable. Usually we would read it as 5 squared just because it's quicker, it's shorter. But you could do it either way. All right, on the next one, we have the third power of 5. It's written with a 5 with a little 3 towards the top. Does anyone know how that one is read? Rajane? 5 cubed. You could call it 5 to the third power, but usually we would call it 5 cubed. And on the last one, you probably could have guessed how to write it. 5 with a small 4 towards the top. Once we get past cubed, there's not really a short way of writing them. So this would be 5 to the 4th power. All right, at the bottom of the box on the front, got one more bullet point to fill in. In the expression a to the b power, b is the exponent, and a is called the base for all real numbers a and b. We've got a reminder that on these problems, as we simplify expressions involving exponents, do not forget about your order of operations. It's often simplified to be called PEMDAS. First step, simplify expressions with grouping symbols. Usually we refer to those as parentheses. That's where the P comes from. Second, simplify powers or exponents. That's where that E comes from. Next, we simplify products and quotients from left to right. So remember, products are multiplication problems. Quotients are division problems. That's where we get the MD. And the last thing we would do is simplify sums and differences from left to right. Sums being addition problems, differences, subtraction problems. All right, on these first examples, all we are doing is writing these in exponential form, meaning they'll have an exponent involved somewhere. On the first one, y times y times y. Mark one. Y cubed. If there are 3 y's multiplied together, our exponent on y is a 3. Y cubed. On number 2, if it helps, multiplication is commutative, which means we can multiply in whatever order we want to. So I don't expect that you'll always rewrite things rearranged, but I could rearrange this to be -6 times 2 times x times x times x. If it's all multiplication, I can reorder it. Paige? So the x would get cubed. What about the -6 times 2? Mm-hmm. So we would multiply the -6 times 2 and we get -12. It's okay. And then like Paige said, since we've got 3 x's multiplied together, that would become x cubed. So we do these one part at a time. The numbers that get multiplied together go out in front, and then we write the variables after. Now on number 3, again, we could rewrite the whole thing rearranging it. I don't expect that you'll always do that, but looking at that problem, what would you do first? Rajane?
I got a question.
Please. Good. First thing we should do is take the -4 times the 2 to get -8. On this one, we have 2 different variables, so we should put them in alphabetical order, meaning the first variable we should deal with is R. So you could rearrange this, or you can just go through and count how many R's you have. How many are there? 1, 2, 3. We would write that as R cubed. Last thing to deal with would be the S's. S squared. We've got 2 of them, so S squared.
We don't put the dot in between.
You do not have to put the dot in between. If you want to put the dots in between, you can. But remember, with variables, if they're written right next to each other, it implies that we're multiplying anyway. So if you want, you could write it with dots. You could write it with parentheses. Oop, not an R, that should be an S.
Doesn't matter what order it goes in.
Okay.
It do?
Yes, so we should always have the number, the whole big integer number out in front, and then we should have it in alphabetical order with our variables. If you don't, it's not necessarily wrong, but this is how our answers should be written. Spencer. It depends on how the directions are laid out. If I were to say put it in standard form or put it in the correct form or choose the best answer, then this is how it should look. Okay. You'll talk more about what standard form is for polynomials in Algebra 2 when you're probably, most of you would be juniors when you get to Algebra 2. Okay. standard form will be a big deal. So it's best if we start practicing that now. Other questions before we work on number 4? These are all good questions.
We're ready.
We're ready?
Yes.
Okay. On number 4, who can tell me what we should do first? Leandra? 3 times -2 gives me -6. The next thing we should deal with are the A's. Mark 1, what should it be? A cubed, because there were 3 of them. Last thing, b to the 2nd power, or b squared, for those 2 b's.
You also put parentheses for it.
Yes, so you can use dots or parentheses if you want. Usually, you will not see any dots or parentheses. So if you're looking at a textbook, this is how the answer would be written, just all smushed together. All right, on 5 and 6, we are asked to find the area of these rectangles. In order to do that, it would be helpful for us to remember the formula for area of a rectangle. What is it? Not all the sides. Length times width. So we multiply one of each type of side. So area is equal to length times width. So if we're setting that up for number 5, area equals, what is the length?
5.
Okay.
It's 2.
It doesn't really matter which one you call the width and which one you call the length. Okay, because we're multiplying them together. So if I were looking at this, I would call the length 5y. If you visualize it differently, that's fine. But if our length is 5y, our width would be 2y. We need to multiply these, Dane. Good, 10y squared. Last hour, some people didn't see it right away, but when I rewrote it, like we saw the problems on the previous slide, people saw it a little bit quicker. Okay, multiplying right next to each other and using parentheses is the same as if I had dots in between all of them. So this would be 10y squared. All right, on number 6, who can tell me how they set up the problem? Spencer. Good. A equals 4x times 1x. And can someone raise their hand to tell me what they got when they multiplied those? Sam M.
4x squared.
Good. 4x squared. 4 times 1 is 4. X times x is x squared. On number 7, what is getting squared?
3. 2.
Is it 3 or -3?
-3. Okay, am I wrong?
It's just 3. The squared only belongs to the 3. It does not belong to the negative sign.
But the negative belongs to
The negative does not necessarily belong to the 3.
Then why is it right there?
Anytime you have a negative number, just a negative number, like for example, a -3, I could rewrite that as -1 times 3, right? I could split those up, and it's the same thing. Does that make sense? The same thing can happen on number 7. If I rewrite that, split up, there's nothing that's binding this negative to the 3. There's nothing trapping the negative sign with the 3. So I can split it up. -1 times 3 squared. The squared definitely belongs to the 3. It does not belong to the negative sign. Are we okay with that, Dane?
So is the answer -9?
So the answer on this one would come out to -9. Okay, the 3 gets squared. That's how we get the 9. And then we multiply it back to the -1 to get -9. Number 8 is different. The parentheses trap the negative with the 3. So on number 8, we are instead taking -3 times -3, which equals a +9. On number 9, what do you think we need to do first?
7 minus 3.
Okay, we work inside of parentheses first. 7 minus 3 is 4. 4 squared is 16. On number 10, are we going to subtract first? No, why not? On number 10, there are no parentheses, which means we do not subtract first. We're following our order of operations. If there are no parentheses, we move on to exponents. What is getting squared?
3.
A 3. Just a plain old 3. So this becomes 7 minus 9. 7 minus 9 is -2. On 11 and 12, we are asked to evaluate. When we evaluate, the first thing we should do is Sam? Rewrite the problem. If we are going to evaluate, we need to rewrite the problem. We are going to rewrite the problem, and very much like we were doing when we used substitution in the last chapter that we covered, we leave a blank for that variable. So we rewrite the problem, we leave a blank. Spencer? You can, but I would still recommend using parentheses. Rajane?
So when you multiply the cube to the parentheses of both,
We'll get there in a minute. What's going to go in this blank, Sam?
-2.
The -2. They told us what m should equal, so that's what's going in the blank. Using our order of operations, is there anything to do inside of the parentheses? No, it's just a -2. There's nothing to do inside the parentheses. So we move on to E, which stands for exponent. Our exponent applies to what number? The -2. Only the -2. So if we have -2 cubed, that would be -2 times what? Times.
-2.
Okay. 3 times out. -2 times -2 times -2 equals -8. Do not tell me that it equals 6 or -6. We are not multiplying the base to the exponent. The exponent just tells us how many times we're multiplying -2 to itself. So down here I'm going to rewrite 4, and in the parentheses I'll now have a -8. If instead of the parentheses you want to use a dot, that's fine, but you need some sort of multiplication symbol. 4 times negative 8
Negative 32.
is negative 32. On number 12, we will start it the same way. We will rewrite the problem, putting a blank or a set of parentheses instead of the variable. What's going to go inside of that blank? The negative 2 again. So we do have a double set of parentheses. You cannot drop the parentheses that were part of the original problem. Otherwise, you're going to be changing the problem. Inside that big set of parentheses, what's happening? What operation? Multiplication. So order of operation says we start inside of parentheses. So we start by multiplying. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Now we have negative 8 to the third power, or negative 8 cubed. So if you need to, you can write it out expanded. Negative 8 times negative 8 times negative 8. Good, that would be negative 512. All right, on 13, we'll start it the same way we were 11 and 12. Rewrite the problem, leave blanks for the variables. So nothing about the problem has changed. I'm just putting blanks instead of R and S. When we go to substitute, we have to make sure we're paying attention to what gets substituted where when we have multiple variables. What's going to go in my first blank? 2. We replaced an R with that blank. R is equal to 2. What about my second blank? A negative 4. We were replacing S. S equals negative 4. Now we start in with our order of operations. What operations are happening inside of our big set of parentheses? Multiplication and addition. Which of those operations should I work on first? Multiplication. 3 times 2 plus 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. The only reason I kept these parentheses around the negative 8 is to separate those two signs, the plus and the negative. So if you don't want to put that set of parentheses, you don't have to. All right, we still have not fully simplified inside of our parentheses. Rajane? Okay, 6 plus negative 8 is negative 2. And negative 2 squared is positive or negative? Positive. This would be negative times a negative. So our answer comes out to be positive.